Hi, everyone. Welcome to the History Bards podcast today. I'm host Dee Marley, and on today's show, we are featuring Maggie Brookes to the show today. She is the author of The Prisoner's Wife and Acts of Love and War. Thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you today?
I'm very well and very delighted to be with you.
Thank you so much. We're thrilled. And for all of our listeners out there, just as a way of introduction, Maggie is an ex-journalist, a BBC TV producer and creative writing lecturer, and is now a full-time novelist and poet. She was born in London and has been writing stories and poems since she was 6. Her novel, The Prisoner's Wife, was published in March 2020 and during the COVID lockdown, and her newest, Acts of Love and War, came out in hardback in the UK in June 2022. Her novels are published by Penguin Random House Astonishing. You know, I read in your bio about your several unpublished novels and how you got to this place of being a published writer. Can you tell us more about yourself and your writing journey?
Yes, of course, Dee. Well, I think I began writing, as I say, as soon as I realized how wonderful stories were when I was about 6. And then I realized that you could write them and make them up yourself. I was off.
Yes.
and wrote many, many stories, wrote novels which sat under the bed and were unpublished because I never met anybody who told me how to do it.
Yeah.
And then eventually, as you said, I became a journalist and then a BBC television historical documentary producer, and then started teaching media and teaching creative writing. Had poems published, have 6 published collections under my married name of Maggie Brookes. And then finally got around to the 2 historical novels, which came about really because somebody told me a story that I just wanted to share, and I wanted to share it so much. I thought, I've got to try and write this as a novel.
Oh, that's really amazing. You've had like quite a history with being around historical things and everything. Can you tell us a little bit more about your connection with BBC? Because that's just fascinating to me.
Okay, well, I went into the BBC from local papers, and I began to research documentaries and also to direct documentaries and to direct studio programs. I made programs about the period immediately after the Second World War, a series for BBC Two called After the War is Over, and another big series called All Our Working Lives, which was about the history of different industries. So I made a variety of different programs. And then I had 2 children of my own, and I didn't want to be away for 6 weeks filming and leave them. And so I started to teach because, of course, that fits in amazingly well with having young children. And I discovered that I absolutely loved encouraging other people with their writing. So, you know, everything has been good. Everything I think feeds into who you are, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. It really does.
I remember one of my students once saying that a writer is like a recycling center. And I think that's right. You pick things up from all sorts of parts of your life, and then they become part of the next thing that you're writing.
I love that. That's really a great quote to have, like maybe on your website or something, that a writer or like a meme, you know, we're always looking for memes. That would be a great meme. I really like that. So can you tell us a little bit more about your books and like the storylines?
Okay, so as you said, the first was called The Prisoner's Wife. What I want to do with books, I want to tell stories. I want to tell great stories, but I also want to help to remember women who've been forgotten. So those are 2 very interesting things to me. And with this story, I was in a lift, in an elevator one day with my mum and an elderly gentleman who said, I bet I could tell you a story about the war that would make your hair stand on end. And I sort of grabbed him by the collar and said, yes, tell me this great story. And the story that he told me was that he had been a prisoner of war of the Germans, and that 2 escaped prisoners had come back into the camp. And when the German guards had gone away, one of them said, I have something to tell you, to the rest of the prisoners. This is not another escaped prisoner. This is my Czech wife. And of course, there was uproar in the camp. And when that had all died down, the other men decided that the only thing they could do was to hide her in plain sight. And they took an enormous risk in doing this because they could have been shot for doing it. She took an enormous risk. She dressed as a British soldier and spent the last 6 months of the war dressed as a British soldier, as a prisoner of the Nazis.
Oh my
and
goodness.
as soon as I was told that story, I thought, oh my goodness, what must that have been like for her?
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to try and tell her story to a wider audience. Mm-hmm. So that was one person's true story. Acts of Love and War, my second novel, was based on the true story of a group of people rather than just one. Mm-hmm. Because this was the story of a tiny handful of untrained but dedicated people who went into the brutal and violent, horrible situation of the Spanish Civil War because they wanted to try to rescue children. And that again struck me as such an extraordinary tale that needed to be told.
Yes.
That I thought, I've got to try and share this with as wide a number of people as possible.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And, whenever I saw that was the storyline of that book, one of my favorite books of all time is Shadow of the Wind. And it kind of is set during that same time period. And there's sections of that book that's devoted to the history of that Civil War and everything. And so I was kind of wondering, with you doing these books and these different eras and everything, what other have there been books that have really influenced you as a writer?
Yes, of course. I think so many. I've always loved historical stories. I think that what you can do with historical fiction is you can tell stories about today, but from a sort of slantwise angle. Mm-hmm. So that I suppose, after Acts of Love and War came out, or just as it was coming out, Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And I saw the same things happening as had happened then. Women and children getting onto trains and having to leave the country overnight. By now, of course, we have fantastic humanitarian aid organizations who were welcoming them and giving them somewhere to go to. But that wasn't the case in the Spanish Civil War.
Right.
And of course, I read books about the Spanish Civil War, but nothing about this particular angle on the Spanish Civil War until I began to read the memoirs of people who had actually been there. Mm-hmm. And who helped with this rescue of children. So yes, lots of books that have influenced me. And again, this thing of being a recycling center, they all feed in. What comes out is your own novel.
That's exactly right. And isn't that the best about being a historical fiction author? It's like you take all of this information and just are able to create something. And I was going to kind of go into about the research you did, but whenever you got to interview that first gentleman who had his story and everything, but was there anything more that you found in your research that was just incredibly fascinating?
Well, so much really. Yeah. I know you're going to ask me in a minute about travel and going to places, so I'll talk about that separately.
Okay.
But the things that I discovered that I didn't know. My dad had been a prisoner of war of the Nazis, mm-hmm. So I knew that during the Second World War, people who were in prisoner of war camps, unless they were officers, were not kept in the camp but sent out to work across. Right. Across the Third Reich, that the whole of the Third Reich really survived and went forward on slave labor, right. On the labor of prisoners of war, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them that kept industry going.
Yeah.
So I knew about that, but what I didn't know about, and how can this have been forgotten in a generation was that as the Red Army approached at the end of the Second World War, all of the prisoners who were kept in the prison camps in Poland and towards the east of the huge Third Reich territory,
Right.
were removed at night, 25th of January, 1944, overnight in a snowstorm. They were all taken out of the camps and made to walk. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of starving men were force marched 500 miles across Germany. It's thought that about a third of them probably died on the route. And that I knew nothing about. I knew absolutely nothing about that.
Yeah.
I knew horribly little about the Spanish Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I didn't know how people were kept alive. And they were kept alive by the kindness of strangers, really.
Right.
Sending food, sending money, and a tiny handful of people distributing that to the starving across the whole of Catalonia.
Right. So that plays very well into the title of your book, Acts of Love and War. Very, very good. Very good. So can you tell us a little bit more about your traveling to the places?
Sure. So when I was doing the research, which became The Prisoner's Wife, I discovered, well, lots of other people know about it, but I discovered for the first time about this long march, this terrible, terrible death march. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't possibly write that.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, maybe if I went and I saw it for myself,
wow.
I might be able to. So my husband and I flew to the Czech Republic. He was my driver. We drove the route of one of these long marches. So we drove up to Lambsdorff prison camp in Poland. And as we got there, it began to snow. And so I got a real feeling of what it was like for these men who were force marched out into a blizzard. Although I was well clothed and well fed, so very different from them. And as we drove, he drove, I took photographs, I made notes. I said to him, do you think 50 men could be put up overnight in that school? Is that barn big enough for 100 men to sleep in overnight? So we took notes, as we drove it through this snowy countryside. A deer came out of the woods and stood. I got out and felt the snow on my face. And after we'd finished this 500-mile journey, I thought, okay, I'm going to have a go at writing this. So being there was absolutely crucial to me in writing The Prisoner's Wife.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you that's a wonderful thing. Like I was saying, like we were talking about before, as historical fiction authors, to be able to, take an experience like that and create it in a book, and to get the reader to have a sense of what they felt as they were experiencing those things. I think that's wonderful that you was able to do that. But I had to be extremely hard, and I was kind of going to talk about that a little bit, about what you found to be extremely difficult about writing this book. I'm sure it was very difficult.
Well, both the books were difficult because they're about I never set out to write about war. I never thought I wanted to write about war. But human beings are at their very worst and at their very best in these extreme circumstances. And I think that's why I've ended up writing about people within war. And I think, terrible, terrible things. Let me just read you a tiny little bit.
Yes,
and I got
please.
This is from Acts of Love and War.
Okay.
And this is at the end, when the refugees are struggling up into the Pyrenees in the winter.
Okay.
A boy of 10 was toiling up the road with his brother on his back. They seemed to have no other family. 2 women with bare feet in sandals had sat down and pulled black shawls over their heads and shoulders. They held out their babies to Lucy as the lorry passed, calling, "Please take them to France." One of the babies lolled, as though it was already dead. That's what you've got to write about.
Right.
You've got to write to try to make sure this never happens again, although it does happen again and
It
again and
does.
again.
Yeah.
But that, I suppose, is what I'm trying to do. And what I've found out about myself, about what I want to do, is to write about, there are love stories in both of these. It's not all horror, let me say. There are love stories in both of these. And the love stories come about because I think once a character starts to be real to you, what do real people want? They want love.
Yes.
And as soon as they become real to you, they start to seek love. And so the main characters in both of my books, Izzy in The Prisoner's Wife and Lucy in Acts of Love and War, have human love stories as well. And friends are hugely important in my life.
Yeah.
So friends become hugely important in the lives of my characters, Izzy and Lucy, as well. They help to sustain and support us, don't they?
Oh, that's wonderful. And all of those things, whenever you're able to portray those things, it connects with your readers. And so that's, we all experience those things, and suffering, and in different varying degrees, of course, and not to the extent that they had to suffer it. But there's like the human element of connection that all of us feel. And I think that's another thing that historical fiction really excels at.
Doesn't it? Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's why I love it. That's why I love to read it.
Yes, me too. Me too.
But you were asking a minute ago about going to a country and what you find out from being there.
Yeah.
Well, Acts of Love and War, I began to research in February 2020. Now, you know what happened in March 2020. In February, I was thinking, oh, this is great. I'm going to go to Spain. I'm going to go up into the Pyrenees. I'm going to go to Barcelona. I'm going to go down into the south to Murcia. No, I couldn't go to any of those places.
No.
Great big map on my wall. I read travel books. I read memoirs. I made friends over the internet with museum curators in the Pyrenees and in Barcelona and in Murcia, and they were so helpful to me.
Wonderful.
I couldn't go.
I know, and that's heartbreaking. I know, because
heartbreaking.
Me and my husband love to travel as well, and we just to be stuck. It's now we've got like all of these trips planned, so I understand.
Do them, enjoy them.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this: since you said that you've been writing since you were very young, so what advice would you give to young writers who are starting out in historical fiction?
Well, I think to any writers, being a writer is like being a musician or an athlete or a football player or something. You just have to, and they have to watch a lot of other people doing it, and then they have to practice again and again and again. So my advice is always read as many books as you possibly can in every hour that you have spare, and write every day, write and write and write, and don't give up.
Yeah.
With The Prisoner's Wife, I knew that this was a great story.
Yes.
I sent it to 20 agents before the 21st accepted it.
Wow.
And then she sold it overnight in a preemptive bid to Penguin Random House. I could have given up at agent number 18 or agent number 19, and I didn't give up because I knew that it was a great story.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the advice that I would give to young writers. Okay, it probably took me longer than I would have liked, but I did a lot of other wonderful things along the way, and nothing is ever wasted. Nothing you read, nothing you write, nothing you see, nothing you experience is ever wasted. It all comes through in some way in your writing.
Yeah, and that kind of sounds like a really good quote to live by. Is that what you live by, or do you have a favorite one?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, my mum used to say, if at first you don't succeed, try, try again. I don't think I have a quote that I live by, but if I did, I think what it would be is be kind. And the quote that I have at the beginning of Acts of Love and War is a quote from the 17th century. Oh my goodness, we never learn, do we?
No.
From William Penn, who saw about him all the horrors that hate and egotism could create. And he said, let us then try what love can do. And that's what the characters in this book are trying to do. They're trying to see what love can do. And what it does is save the lives of, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of children.
Well, I think that's an excellent quote to live by for everyone around the world. So can you tell?
In a different world.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit, what are you working on now?
I'm working on a novel about the First World War, another war. I really didn't intend to do this, but I fell over. I sort of tripped over another really great story, which I'm not going to tell you much about.
No, okay.
But it's a story about women, about fantastic real women doing extraordinary things during the First World War. And I am hoping that there will be some travel involved.
Oh, good. Well, that sounds great. And with Acts of Love and War, do you have any events or anything that everybody should know about?
Well, as you know, it came out in North America last year in paperback, but I have a paperback edition of the UK edition is coming out in paperback. Look, what's happened to Lucy? She's gone from blue for the paperback edition. I'm not quite sure why, but it's quite moody and interesting.
Yeah.
So for the paperback edition in the UK, that's coming out on August the 3rd. So I'm doing quite a lot of online things and events leading up to that launch.
Oh, that's great. Well, be sure to send me that link and we'll put it in our description so that people can be sure to go to those events or launches, or if you're having any book signings, or do you have any book signings coming up?
I'm doing them in the UK,
but
I'd always be very happy to send signed book plates to people if they would like to contact me through my website or through social media. I'd be very happy to send them a signed book plate if they'd like it.
Well, we'll definitely put that book. I will definitely put your website link in the description for this podcast. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We really do appreciate it.
I am very honored to be here, and I love the work that you're doing. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. That's really kind. We are very excited for your books, and we wish you much success on your new release. And as always, for more info on Maggie's books, you can go to her website at www.maggiebrooks.uk, and that is Brooks with an E. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, as next week's episode, we are thrilled to host historical author Jan Foster. Thank you to our listeners and viewers. This is Dee Marley. Keep making history and keep listening.